That's right, yeah, I noticed that yesterday.
My mom like deep cleaned like underneath my pillow. She's so appreciative.
Yeah.
I washed my curtains and then I get one of the bathroom. And so I was like, must be like a little wet. I was like, oh, I guess they're hanging them anyway. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I can do that, yeah.
I was like, let's do, I don't want that. It's really good. Or let it.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll hang them up. That'll be good. Right there. It's fine. All right.
I've got Brad something.
That's great. That's great. It's exciting because I have some issues. Oh, it's so big. You know, it's coming. You guys go somewhere? I started riding with a kid. Where are you going?
Oh, yeah. I forget I have it for that.
So they mainly use the action setting. Jen and I use it with
So Candy didn't talk you into
and then we like this song. But eventually he wants to learn to play with towel. As a towel piece. So we haven't finished until live that it makes so many things. And do it one step at a time. Figure out how to make it and little ins and outs to do at least a small part. Then we can venture out and spend it live. Right. That's what the kind of thing he wants the whole thing down. And then it messes up and then he's disappointed.
So you won't be alone.
One step at a time.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah.
How's everybody doing today? Huh?
I can take a hint. Sit down
Yeah.
and be quiet.
Yes, pretty much. That's okay. It's okay. All right. We're going to try to pick up where we left off on Wednesday. And if you were here on Wednesday, you know that that was a little, yeah, very abrupt is actually.
Like a whirlwind.
Yes, like a whirlwind. There you go. So glad that Sam's with us. Things went well in that scenario. Things went well with Anna this week and with the Geyer clan, so that's great news as well. Just had lots of good things that came out of this week. So we're going to bow in prayer and then we'll get going in 2 Kings chapter 3. Let a couple folks come on in. All right. Let's go ahead and bow to God in prayer at this time. Precious Lord, you are wonderful and great and mighty, and we've just talked about a couple of the blessings that came this week, and we're grateful that you've continued to look over your people here at Pittsboro. Father, we know that we need to be dependent upon you for all that we have, and sometimes we forget that, and it's when we have moments of great need that we definitely notice you and recognize you. Father, we know that not always do the things that we want, though, go our way, and we understand that you have a greater plan in place. Help us to recognize that as we look through your word and study from it. Help us to understand that sometimes the bigger picture is different than what our picture is, and you have a greater plan for us. Just help us to recognize that in our own lives as well. Take care of us as we study and help our minds to be sharp and ready to have a heart that can understand and to also apply to our lives. This is our prayer through your Son, our precious Savior's name, Jesus. Amen. All right. So I'm going to start us out with a little bit different. I'm going to take us back all the way to the very beginning of our study in the Kings. We talked about some themes that we might see in this study. So what I wanted for us today, this morning, to start out with is asking you, what themes have you started to see as we are getting through this study? What themes have you seen all the way from the beginning of 1 Kings chapter 1 to now, which is very towards the very beginning of 2 Kings 2, which, as you remember, is supposed to be one full book, not necessarily split up.
It seems to me as I go through here, it's like a one-upmanship. The king takes over, he goes away, the next king is worse, the next king is worse. And it's almost like they're not intentionally doing this, but when you look at it, you get the impression that they're trying to invoke their way or their beliefs, and it just continues to be a disaster.
Okay, good. Anybody else? What have you noticed as some themes as we've studied so far?
Alan,
Yeah.
I think from the very first, what struck me was that they wanted to be like the Lord,
Yeah.
the people, and they were happy with just having God direct them. And that was leading to their desire.
Good. Very good. All right. Brad.
Here lately, we've seen the focus shift from the kings really to the prophets.
Mm-hmm.
And the first few chapters were how the kings led the people astray and into sin. And the story seems in the past few chapters how God is trying to minister to them through the prophets, because he knew the kings would be broken and lead them into the world, like Donna said. But God's trying to pull them back or keep a remnant of them sanctified through the prophets, which was his design from the beginning, is to give prophets and help them to lead.
He had his own spokespeople, right? Okay, good. Anything else?
One of the things we've seen is how the women in each of these kings' lives, whether it was wife or mother or grandmother, how that guided the way they went,
Mm-hmm.
and how important that relationship is, how tight that relationship is, and what that means. It can either mean good or it can mean bad, depending on.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Their influence, right? Mm-hmm. Very good. Anything else that you've kind of seen as we've gone through here? I know for me, one of the big things that I'm taking away even more this time going through this is how much we see glimpses of Christ. It's just amazing the ties that you're starting to really notice with these individuals that are in these, they're not stories, they're real life truths, right? I also see glimpses of God's judgment, and I see his justice. And I start to see that, again, not everything is going the way that I would want things to happen or that I would anticipate to happen. And I also reflect back, okay? What has occurred, not just in the kingship, but now we have a permanent people that are devoted to God, because they now have not only their land, but they have a place a permanent place to worship God. And I think that is a change, that they've always had a location that would be traveling, right? So now that it's the sense of permanence, and looking to see now at that next step, now that they're permanent, what are the things that they're thinking? What are the things that they're doing? It's not exactly a theme, but more of just a general observation, I guess. Anything else that you want to add before we get going that you've noticed so far?
One thing is just the choice that we have to follow earthly wisdom or heavenly wisdom. And so by that I mean, it's like, just because the king said it's an earthly king, right? Oh, well, the king says the high places are fine to still have, right? So we can do it. It's like, there's lots of things for us today that our government says you can do, this is allowable, yet that transgresses what God's law says, right? And so it's one of those where there's just a lot of people where it's like the influence comes from that top down, and they just kind of took it like, well, the king says it's okay, so we can go do all this stuff.
Sure.
And then not going, but what does God think about that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's kind of, I mean, we're still in that situation today.
Yeah.
And the question that we have to ask ourselves.
Yep. Very good, everybody. Appreciate that. Of 2 Kings, the beginning of that, we really start to see that influence that Elijah has had. And we start to see now the end of his life, that transition from him to Elisha is going to take place. And we also see, I would say, continued power that Elijah is showing. And that's one thing that I notice, is that even though there's been great things that we've seen through the kings, the power is actually through the vessels that God has put in place, right? And so that's the exciting part. Elisha, what's the very first thing that we see of Elisha? Of the power that is given to him, which is double that of Elijah. You remember what the very first thing that we see?
Didn't he pick up his mantle and then spread the water again?
Yeah. Some will say mantle, some will say cloak, some will say coat, just depending on your version. But the waters were separated there at the Jordan. And I liken it to this area right here, right? This is the Jordan, and you guys are on the Israelite and Judah side, and, well, you guys are the Moabites and the Edomites, okay? and he gets to cross back over, and there's witnesses to this, right? And so, again, we have this great vision of things that are going to occur in the future, right? Christ is dividing people. He's not here to make everybody be happy together. He's not bringing peace on earth. Okay, so even though it's very figurative, you do see glimpses of that great mighty power in this Old Testament story. All right, so fast forward a little bit. We have Elisha and his great power, and then he has a spring that he comes across in Jericho area, and that spring is not a good spring. It's having, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Yeah, it's just not good. And so what does he do? What does he have for this to make it work? It's going to cause sickness. That's probably a better way of putting it, right? He purifies it, right? Yeah, yeah. He purifies it with salt. Again, kind of a glimpse to the future with Christ. And it makes me think of Matthew chapter 5 and how he talks about how we need to be that salt of the earth. Then we go into the scenario of some bears. Does anybody remember anything about bears? There were 2 female bears. What happened to them? They came after some folks. Who'd they come after?
There were some boys that was mocking.
Yeah, Elisha.
Bald-headed.
Yeah, yeah. Just go on up with your Elijah friend, right? That's what we were kind of talking about. I think that's probably a good way of thinking. Probably is not specifically said there, but probably a good likeness of what might have happened there. But again, you start to see things that are being prophesied that come true also pretty quickly. The types of things that Elijah was able to do, Elisha can do, and then some. All right. Let's get into chapter 4 a little bit more now. We had the widow, and Elisha was presented to this. This widow came to him asking for his help, and she was able to have that help provided to him. What was her scenario that we talked about was similar to Elijah's scenario. What did she have? Or what didn't she have? It's probably the better way of putting it. She didn't have a whole lot, did she? Her value was running very, 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 very low. She had creditors that she was going to owe, and she was thinking that she'd give her sons to. She was in debt, and she knew that they'd have to be slaves. That's like the only thing that she could think of. But Elisha gave her a different choice, a different option, a better option, one that was purely from God. These vessels that were supposed to be, that were empty, right, of the neighbors, are now being able to be filled miraculously. And reminds you back at the widow in Elijah's time, and that same type of incidents happening there. Anything that you want to add to that particular event, that account? Because chapter 4 is all about women. Why do you think that this particular chapter is so strongly devoted to the women of this time? I think Dawson did a really good job at reminding us of all these women that were involved in the king's lives. But now we start to see women that are involved in the prophets' lives, right? And I believe, this is just me, God is showing us that He has purpose for everybody. And He has a plan. And many times, we don't see ourselves in that plan. Doesn't matter who we are, right? In this environment, in this time period, what were the differences compared to today in society between men and women? What were some of the differences? Anybody? Men and women at that time had different roles that were very distinct and there was not as much of a ability to have land, for instance, or have a say in the matter. And I think that this is a glimpse of his kingdom to come, right? This is what he's providing everybody. Kind of similar to how we take our focus, and we do this often about the Jews and the Gentiles, but we oftentimes don't do it with the men and the women. The women didn't have the same privileges as the men. And this is showing a glimpse of that greatness that he's going to be providing. We had a brokenness at the very beginning, right? And I think things would have been totally different had it stayed complete and whole and perfect. But it didn't. Anything else that you see in this? I love this particular chapter because of all the great qualities that are shown through here. And you see some somewhat disbelief and some belief in God too. So not everything's perfect here. What happens with the Shunammite woman starting in verse 9? Verse 8, how about, let's go to 8. What happens to the Shunammite woman? We started to talk about this, and I think we got to the end of this account, maybe, or close to that.
So there was a pretty well-off couple, didn't have children.
Yeah.
And anytime Elisha was in the area, they invited him, fed him, and showed hospitality to him.
Yeah.
And when they saw this was recurring, she said to her husband, hey, why don't we fix a little spot, a little room for Elisha when he's in town? So they built a room. Elisha is kind of overwhelmed with their hospitality toward him. They didn't have to do that.
The gratitude that
and
he
so he says, hey, what can I give to you? Like, how can I show my gratitude to you? And she's like, I don't need anything. I've got everything I need. And his servant, Gehazi, says,
Yep.
hey, she doesn't have a child, and they're older. So Elisha calls her up and pronounces this prophecy: by next year, you're going to be standing there holding a child.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, that happens. But something happens with the child, and I'll leave it there and let somebody else
Good.
pick it up.
Good. I don't think we actually got to that part of it, so that's good. You see in this account glimpses of the past as well. You see Abraham and Sarah kind of in that same boat. So older, don't have children, kind of that same thought process. Now, it wasn't a year, but there was promise that was given to them as well. I think of Hannah too, and she cried for a son, and she was able to receive a son. And there's a certain level of belief and a certain level of trust. But this couple, especially the woman, she's like kind of had a similar reaction to Sarah, didn't she? It's like, wait a minute here. You're kidding me, God, right? So she says there, which verse is it? Yeah, verse 16. She said, no, my Lord, O man of God, do not lie to your servant. But it actually did happen. A year later, it did happen. So years passed. She's had a son. They've had a son. Now you go even further, and he's a little bit older, and that son is now with his dad out in the fields. Now somebody tell me what happens. What's the boy cry out?
My head.
Right? Something had happened. We don't know the scenario. That wasn't important. What was important is the follow-up to that. You would think that that would be very impactful. Dad's like, okay, go. Take him to your mom. To his mom, not the servant's mom. And when the boy gets to his mom, the Shunammite woman, she takes him, she embraces him, she has him in her grasp, just as a mom would do. But it doesn't go the way that we would want it to. The boy dies in her arms. And it's so odd because this week we had a chicken, and this is totally different. Don't get me wrong. We had a chicken, and I go out to the coop after work, and was going to collect eggs, and one of the chickens was right at death. I mean, she was like right there. Her comb was already starting to turn purple. So we take her in, we try to give her Epsom salt bath, warm Epsom salt bath, which is one of the things that you can do. I thought she was egg bound. That wasn't the case. She just had fluid on her back abdomen area. And she ended up dying in my arms. Now, I don't have the same affinity towards her that I do my son, but it was just interesting that this account was happening, and as I'm back there waiting for this bird to hopefully let the water pass or something, I'm trying to massage that area, I'm thinking of this particular account, right? It's just funny, but it's not, right? Because there is so much in a person's life, so valuable, so precious. She didn't ask for this child to begin with. And so I wonder if some of her responses are because of that and what she ends up talking to Elisha about. What was it that she said to him when she finally got to him? Well, first, she told her husband that everything was okay, which was a lie. Then she tells Gehazi, when she meets him, kind of the same thing, another lie. She finally gets to Elisha. Now what happens? Now what happens? What is the response that she gives to him?
He can tell that she's in utter distress.
Yeah.
So he makes the servant leave.
Right.
So she can express to him what's going on.
Yeah. And sometimes don't we do that? Don't we recognize the scenario? Something's off. Something's not right. So we need to just take this in more of a private setting. And that's what Elisha does. How does she respond to Elisha?
She won't leave her.
Huh?
She won't leave him.
She won't leave him. Okay, well, that's true. Yes. What else? Look at verse 28, starting kind of in verse 28. Then she said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, 'Do not deceive me'?" So he said to Gehazi, "Tie up your garment and take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, do not greet him, or if anyone greets you, do not reply. And lay my staff on the face of the child." Then the mother of the child said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." Right? I'm right here. I'm sticking by you. So I think there's a level of true trust and belief, but at the same point, anguish and disbelief, not understanding the situation. That's kind of the way that I read it. Do you guys read it something different? I guess you read it the same way I do.
I think, well, initially, Gehazi meets her, right?
Yeah.
And so, like in my mind, it's kind of like, oh no, Gehazi, everything's good. Like, I'm just going over here to talk to this guy. Right?
She didn't want him to know,
Right.
did she?
It's almost
Yeah.
just kind of like, just go ahead. Can I just talk to the manager? Can I just talk to the person that I really need
Yep.
to get things done with, right?
Yep.
But we see that there is that trust there and the promise that was made, and it's like the urgency to speak to this person. What caught me was the fact that when she grabs hold of his feet and Gehazi
Oh, yeah.
goes to just like, tear her away, and Elisha's like, no, she's in distress. And I was just thinking of like how people can hold themselves on a pedestal too, and it's just like, you're not good enough to touch, my garments, and things like that too. And so I was thinking like a couple things of when just like the woman who had the hemorrhage just touched the garment of Christ, right? And then I think of like when the people were just sending children to Christ to, bless their child basically, right?
Yeah,
and the
right.
disciples were like, no, get them away. And Christ says, no, this is what you need to be like, right? And so I'm just kind of likening this back to Christ-like behavior going, no, let's address this situation. I'm not above
Right.
dealing with this. I've made this promise to this person. It's,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
I was just seeing flavors of that mixed in to what was going on here as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Micah.
Well, I'll just say the obvious, that we see the echoes of Jesus here
It-
with the only son who
Yep.
dies and then is brought back to life.
Yeah. That's actually where I was gonna, good way of bringing that, because that's where I was going to. Clearly, we see that the child, the son, is risen from the dead. And Elisha, obviously, we see a glimpse of what Elijah was able to accomplish too. So again, bringing back similarities between the two prophets, but also the glimpse of the future as well. Elisha then, he's able to go amongst these people. There's a stew that is made, or a pot that is made, and has some wild vines that they're not exactly sure what it is, and clearly it's poisonous. And in this scenario, Elisha's able to make it edible. And again, it brings back that water and the scenario of living water and food that we can eat. It just, to me, it brings glimpses again of Christ in the future. Chapter 5, we start to see one large account with Naaman. Who was Naaman? Somebody give me an idea of who he was. What was his importance in everything?
The Syrian commander, army commander.
Yeah. So north of where Israel is. We've talked about that relationship back and forth, right? Now, what's his malady though? He's not a fully well person. What's wrong with him? He has leprosy. And what do we know about leprosy? Just historically, what do we know about leprosy?
Very painful, very contagious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just stay away. A skin disease, very contagious. So they were typically set apart from everybody, outcast. But he's a commander, right? So it's a little hard to do. And what is, again, kind of a glimpse to things in the future, somebody unsuspecting helps in this scenario. Helps him out, gives actually his wife some advice. There's this young Jewish girl that had been basically like a servant based on times in the past. She was taken and she became his wife's servant. She says what to him, though? I know a guy. And she sends toward, lets his wife know about Elisha. Well, the king sends a letter. The letter gets sent, and Elisha finds this out, and now what happens? What happens then in, let's see.
So he goes down to,
6, 7,
he
8.
goes down to Elisha's house. Is that where you want to pick up? So
verse 8.
He gives in, he's like, okay, he asks the king, can I go down? I think I can get healed. The king gives him a letter to the king of Israel.
Right.
And he goes down and gives the letter to the king of Israel. I find his reaction comical. He gives the letter, and the letter's like, hey, here's my commander of my army. I'm sending you to be healed. And the king of Israel is like, what? How can you ask me to do that? Am I God? You're going to send this person down here? And you want me to, it sounds like some of my employees, honestly. What? I have to do this now? What do you think I am? So, he panics, but then he sends him to Elisha, and I also, it's interesting, Elisha doesn't even come to the door.
I know, that's what I thought too.
Right?
I thought that was funny.
Elisha doesn't even come to the door. He's like, somebody greets him and he says, sure, yeah. Tell him to go dip in the Jordan. So.
And Naaman's reaction was quite interesting too, because he clearly had a preconceived notion of what was going to be going on, right? There's probably some magical power that this Elisha has, and he says to go into the Jordan and dip there. Well, I can have I've got some good rivers up where I live. Why wouldn't those be better than this dirty Jordan, right?
I also think, like, he's commander of the army. He's a great man and is highly respected.
Yeah.
And I think he wants Elisha to come out
Yeah.
and
recognize him.
who he
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Like, he wants maybe Elisha to feel honored that he would ask him
Mhm.
to do this for him.
Yeah.
Kind of projecting a little.
And well, but he had to even travel just to get there too. It wasn't a short distance that he would have had to come to do this. So there was a certain level of trust and faith that Naaman had to have to even get there, right? And so the scenario isn't quite the same as what he expected. We come across that from time to time, and yet there was something. And his servants even said, well, he just basically blew it off, right? But his servants are like, but if you were asked to do something hard, you would have done it, right? You would have wanted to be healed. It is a very comical story, in my opinion.
It's a reminder too that like Naaman came like in faith, right? Going, hey, I need this too, right? He has some skin in the game.
Absolutely.
I need this, right?
Yeah.
But he came in his mind of how he wanted to see it happen.
Yep.
So we go into something, God, I've got faith. I know you're gonna deliver me, and if it could look exactly like how I had envisioned it,
Yeah.
that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
And God goes, I'm gonna do it in a way that will be, you know, it's like, it's for us to go, oh, you of little faith. I was interjecting my plan into
Yeah.
this. God, just let me follow yours.
And to Micah's point, I was even wondering if he was thinking that it might be some type of a show, like
Yeah.
because
Hey, wave the hand, like, let's-
I wondered if he was going to have lots of people, come, and none of that. None of that. In fact, go to the Jordan, Don.
Well, to Cole's point, it's God is the author of stories that we can't fathom, because whose faith really saved Naaman? It was the girls. It was her parents who taught her of who God is and who his prophet is in their land before she was taken. And they instilled that in her enough that she believed that someone who took her captive would be blessed by this same prophet. We can't write that story. We can't even fathom that story, because there's so many dead ends that no, that story doesn't get told. He doesn't listen to her. There's so many things that just do not happen. But yet in God's plan, absolutely.
That's the way it happens. Yeah. Go ahead, Brad.
So I was just thinking through this because I thought I had to teach last time. And if you kind of do just a flyby, and you look at all of these stories and try and kind of summarize them just generally, like you've got the story of the oil filling all the pots, the lady healing her son, the pot of death, right? You've got feeding of 100 from a little bit. You've got Naaman. So the summary in my mind, you see that God through Elisha is a redeemer who ransoms by paying the debt, right? He made sure that debt was paid in the first story. Second story, he's a giver of life who brings life into the world and even brings it back from death. He's the purifier of sustenance who prepares a table in the presence of our enemies. You see that? The Good Shepherd does that. He's a provider of sustenance who feeds a lot with a little. And he's the healer of all affliction, who cures the doubtful but obedient Gentile. So, and he also is the enforcer of he holds people accountable for their greed at the end of the story.
And with Gehazi,
So you just kind of see, like, here's God. God is the main character of the story.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
You see what he's doing.
Absolutely.
Through Elisha, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's God that is the power at work and showing, I'm the redeemer, I'm the healer, I'm the giver, I'm the provider of all of these things. Even when the whole nation forsakes me, I'm still there.
I saw it also as the way you said that God's the main character. I've been thinking these are all the supporting cast members.
Yeah.
You have a woman that was standing by and was seeing a reoccurring man, and you don't hear the husband noticed it.
Right.
But she's like, hey, we could do something here. That's Carrie does that with me sometimes, where I'm just so focused here. Hey, why don't we try this, or seeing different things. And then you see the supporting cast convincing him, go dip.
Just do it.
Like, it's nothing huge. Get over yourself. Go dip. So that supporting cast can be so important.
But you also start to see. Go ahead, Micah.
Can I say the last word?
Go for it.
I just hate to let this passage slip by without noticing the baptism being good.
That's exactly where I was going.
grew up always feeling like baptism was so random. It's not random.
No.
The cleansing is necessary, and it starts all the way back in the Old Testament. It starts way before this in Noah,
And just the same. It's a dirty piece of water. Like, how is that going to actually cleanse me, right?
Yeah, because it's not of you.
It's not.
It's
It's
of
not.
God.
It's exactly right. Yeah. And I'm glad that you talked about healing, because that was the other theme that I was going to bring into this, that we haven't seen in a strong way, but we have. We've seen brought back to life. Now we've seen healing. That, like, all the things that Christ did, we see. Right? Great job, guys. Thank you.